There are too many so-called leaders nowadays that are content to stay at headquarters and never travel to the field to see their teams. Hi, this is Mike. Welcome to another edition of the Ronin Leadership Podcast. I haven't done this for a few weeks. My wife Janice and I have been busy traveling. We've had some short trips to the Seattle area and San Francisco. Had a great time seeing friends and family, but back here now and back in the saddle and ready to re-engage on these podcasts. We've got also a great lineup of guests that'll be coming up in the next few months. People from different aspects of business, not just security. So really looking forward to that, and we'll tell you more about that later. As I say at the beginning and end of every podcast, if you like what you're hearing, number one, hit the subscribe button. Number two, tell your friends and family about it. And certainly make sure that you tell your friends and family to purchase, and also you, if you haven't purchased yet, The Art of Ronin Leadership. My first book that came out last year. I've gotten a lot of great feedback from it, which actually led me to write a second book. Which is called, I should say, The Art of Executing Ronin Leadership Strategies. The book will be coming out in July of this year, 2022. And the impetus for the book was actually you. Those of you who provided feedback to me on how much you liked the first book, which kind of told my story of leadership and what I consider Ronin leadership to be. But a lot of you said, that's great, but we also want to know how to do it. How do you build a team? How do you develop a business strategy that will sell to the C-suite? How do you get funding from the CFO's office, for instance, to execute on those strategies? How do you practice? How do you do continuous improvement? Make sure you stay sharp. All those kind of things. And so this new book, which I had a blast writing, was really about the how-to, how to do these things from my experience. And hopefully when you get the book, you'll be able to, as you're trying to develop your strategies, developing your team, et cetera, you'll be able to use this book. Some of the best books I've written, I wish. Some of the best books that I have read, especially as I was building and growing our team at Microsoft, were those kinds of books. The books where I could read them and say, okay, I'm gonna try to apply this or this or this to my team and our strategy as we're trying to build our strategies. And it was awesome. It was awesome because we were able to really incorporate a lot of these best practices from books into our strategies. And it's gratifying to see when they work out. So hopefully you'll get a lot out of this new book. We have been advertising this book on all social media, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and we will let you know, certainly as soon as it's getting ready to be launched. It's in its last phases of layout and et cetera. So stay tuned, it's coming. So now we have to talk about the topic of the day. I was trying to think about what to write about, what to podcast about. And I was talking to my wife this morning after we worked out. And she mentioned a conversation that we had yesterday after yesterday's workout with the owner of our F45 franchise, a guy named Jake, great guy. And I don't know how we got on the topic of CrossFit, but we started talking about it, and he mentioned a CrossFit studio not far from where we live called Kaizen, Kaizen. And I said, yeah, I know that place. We pass by it all the time when we're traveling on this road called Hualapai, which is one of the main drags, not too far from where we live. And I thought, of course, the name was kind of cool. It's Japanese. And so we talked about it, and I think Jake probably looked it up right there, but it means basically continuous improvement. So I was just talking to Janice today, and she mentioned, hey, your book deals a lot, your new book especially deals a lot with continuous improvement. Why don't you talk about Kaizen? And I thought, great idea. So this podcast and the idea of it is courtesy of my wife, Janice. So thank you, Janice. So I looked up a more in-depth definition of Kaizen, so I'm going to read it to you. It'll kind of lay the groundwork for this particular podcast. So, over 30 years ago, Masaki Imai sat down to pen the groundbreaking book Kaizen, the key to Japan's competitive success. Through this book, the term Kaizen was introduced in the Western world. Today, Kaizen is recognized worldwide as an important pillar of an organization's long-term competitive strategy. Since introducing this system for organizations and their long-term strategy, companies that implement Kaizen have continually yielded superior results. Kaizen means improvement. Moreover, it means continuing improvement in your personal life, your home life, social life, and your working life. When applied to the workplace, Kaizen means continuing improvement involving everyone, managers and workers alike. So, that is the official definition of Kaizen. Continuous improvement is very important, and my new book really goes a lot into continuous improvement. You may have a highly functioning team that continues to nail its business strategies and goals, and that's great. If you don't have that, then you're working your way to that. However, it's a double-edged sword when you have a really high functioning team, because at some point that team and you as a leader may start to believe your own BS. Oh, you're so wonderful, you guys break the mold on this and that, and you get your accolades. When we were at Microsoft Global Security and we had built our GSOCs and we were in demand for doing speeches at industry events, we had all kinds of people coming to Microsoft to benchmark with us. Articles were written about our team, et cetera, et cetera. One of the things we had to make sure that we were aware of was that we didn't believe our own BS. Right? We were proud of our accomplishments. We worked damn hard to get to where we were as a global security team that was respected in the industry, but we were no better and no worse than any other of our peers in the industry. In fact, we still had a lot to learn from our peers in the industry, even when they came to benchmark with us. As I always said, we always learn as much from them as hopefully they learn from us. So continuous improvement is a mindset so that you don't lose your edge. Because I've seen teams, heard of teams where you get to a certain point, hey, you think you know everything, kind of stagnate. It's kind of like in a race where someone's out front, in a foot race, and then they decide to coast because they think, hey, they've got it all together. And all of a sudden their competitors catch up to them and then they surpass them, they beat them. You never want to get there, right? You don't want to be that. So continuous improvement is the way to forestall that. So I was thinking about, some of the, main pillars of continuous improvement that will help you and your teams make sure that you're not just cognizant of continuous improvement, but you're actually practicing it. So I break it down into 3 areas. Training, meetings, and also trips to the field. And I'll talk a little bit about all those. Let's take training first. Training is always very important in any enterprise, in any endeavor. As you're building a team, you probably are really focused on selecting leaders that are going to help you drive your team, your direct reports, right? As they were. And you want to give them the tools, as well as yourself, the tools to succeed. So you may invest in leadership training. But that leadership training should be systemic. And what I mean by that is there's too many companies, enterprises that I call it flavor of the month, flavor of the year leadership training. 1 year it may be emotional intelligence. Another year maybe it's diversity. Another year it's unconscious bias, or whatever it is that somebody in some HR department thinks, hey, this would be great, right? And the problem is that there's no systemic program to guide baby leaders to become mature leaders. These are one-off programs that are not bad in and of themselves, but there's no systemic program to drive leaders the way they do in the military, the way they do in law enforcement a lot of times, and also GE. I've been a fan of GE and their former chairman, Jack Welch, for years, and GE's always had a system where whether you're a baby leader or a senior leader, you go through the same kind of leadership trajectory and training at this institute that they have, so that there's a common leadership DNA for GE leaders. And at least they have that. They're thinking about a systemic way. I have never seen that in any other enterprise. Even at Microsoft, we were lucky enough to have bosses in our organization that believed in training. They might have been one-off every year, but they believed in training. There were other divisions, business units, they never did leadership training, or you had to do it on your own. Their leaders didn't emphasize it, which just floors me, but that's for another podcast. So in the area of leadership training, think about the leadership training that's available. Some of it may be within your organization, a lot of it may be external. And in my case, we had several major security organizations that provided training. One such training was at the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern University in Chicago. They provided a 1-week course on leadership and business acumen for security professionals. And even though you were security professionals, the business cases that you were given were not security oriented. You would collapse into teams over a period of a week, dissect business cases, then have to present the rationale for why you took decision X versus decision Y. And the idea was to train you to think like a business person and be able to provide that type of leadership training back to your individual teams. And my team did a lot of iterations of these, as well as industry specific training. But I think it's important as you as a leader start thinking about you and your team, think about more like a building block. What are the things that they need? What kind of leadership training do they actually need? What's out there? And certainly, take advantage of social media. A lot of the people that we brought in to do training for us in global security at Microsoft, I found just on social media, following Twitter feeds and Facebook or LinkedIn, contacting these people and eventually having them come out and do some really great training for our team. So, you as a leader have to be thinking about all these things and making sure that you're looking at it in a very programmatic, systemic way, and not just, well, this year we're going to do this kind of training and next year we'll do that kind of training. Think about it. Leadership training is like any other strategy, right? It has a beginning. In this case, it doesn't have an end. But, when you build a strategy, there are building blocks, right? In order to get to where you want to go. It's the same way with leadership training. No one size fits all. So I can't tell you how yours is going to look, but think about it. Another thing think about is some advanced degree training. It's not for everybody, but for your top talent, your high performers, if they're desirous of coming to a place where they can excel by having an advanced degree, master's degree, for instance, that kind of thing. Certainly think about it. A lot of companies will help support that financially. May not do the whole pot, but they'll do some of it. Microsoft certainly was pretty generous in that, but again, it's competitive. So you want to reserve that for your top talent, those maybe in your succession plan, or in the case of your direct reports, in their succession planning, or for them, obviously, as well. And certainly, I think it can really help improve one employees' morale, and then also especially if whatever degree they're pursuing, there's some relationship to their particular work. That's even better, and that's essential, actually. So think about that. Be very measured about who these kind of opportunities are offered to. Make sure that the ROI is there, so that for the person who takes it and comes back with that advanced degree, they're going to be able to use that in your organization for the betterment of your organization and the company, the enterprise. And it can pay dividends. And I think the third kind of training, and I talk a lot about this in the second book, I referred to it in the first book, is emotional intelligence, EQ. Very, very important. I think that every high-flying team, high-performing team has had some type of emotional intelligence training. Why is it important? Because what emotional intelligence does, it gets to the heart of why people act or react the way they do. You know, our leadership team that we were developing in the early 2000s, we went through several iterations of EQ training. We were just getting to know each other as a team, but we had to learn to play well in the sandbox, right? Proverbial sandbox. Meaning that if this person disagreed with another person on a business matter, they took it personally, right? Even though it wasn't personal, it was a business discussion. So a big part of EQ training is to kind of strip down those walls, right? To give feedback on each other. So my team would give me feedback during those sessions on, hey boss, I think you're doing this great. This here, you could be a little more direct. You're too subtle. You know, some of us get the subtleties, and some of us would rather be smacked in the face. You know, just tell us what you want or what you're thinking. And then I would leave the room, and then the rest of the team, with the moderator, of course, would then go through the same drill. And it can get heated, especially with a new team. They know each other, but they don't know each other that well. And when one peer says, hey, you know, I like what you're doing about here, but, you know, like you never come coordinate with me, even though what you're doing impacts my business, and then it gets personal, but that's okay. The idea is to strip away that personal layer and understand that we're talking about business decisions, business discussions, that we're not always going to agree. We will disagree, and that's wonderful. You know, best decisions are made when you debate issues and come up to a collective solution that will help you drive your strategy and your team forward. And so that's the beauty of emotional intelligence training, and I think it's really vital for teams to have that. I don't think you can be a high-performing team without it. What I mean is, you may make your business goals, but it will probably be messy. There'll be dead bodies along the way. You'll have backstabbing and silos, et cetera, et cetera. Now, you may make those business strategies, but it'll probably take you longer, and it's probably more difficult and a lot more painful than it had to be than if you took the time to have your team engage in this kind of training and go through the pain of giving feedback to each other and understanding each other, etc. And as I mentioned in the book, just because we took that training didn't mean that there weren't disconnects. I've had times where I still had to mediate really heated discussions between some of my direct reports and even with some of their reports. But at the end of the day, the idea was to be able to be vocal and not hide anything. Passive aggressives need not apply, right? And so the idea of EQ, emotional intelligence training, is to strip away those falsities, those layers of fakeness and passive aggressiveness, and just get to the heart of business matter. And if it offends you that somebody doesn't like your proposal, fine, be offended, but then defend your position and then be enough of a business person to acknowledge that if your business position isn't exactly the right one and the other person's is, then be the better person, right? And that's kind of what emotional intelligence gets you. So make sure you take a look at that. The second area of continuous improvement is something that we all can do with very little money. It's called reading. All real leaders read. If you're not reading, you're doing you and your teams a disservice. And I'm not talking about reading the latest Tom Clancy book or something like that. I love action novels. I have no problem. I'm a Lee Child fan, so Jack Reacher fans, I'm with you. But I'm talking about leadership books and biographies specifically. Find those leadership authors that you like and start reading them. Patrick Lencioni, I've mentioned him many times, both in forums like this, as well as in some of my writing. He runs a company called The Table Group out of San Francisco. He first wrote The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, which is like the cornerstone book for any team, especially if you're forming up, as it talks about the typical dysfunctions of a team and how you can forestall it. And then he's written another series of books that have really made an impact. And the other thing is, what I love about the books, at the end of the books, all the books are told in fables. So it's told as a story. So it's not just theoretical, it's told as a story. There's a protagonist that deals with some business issue and maybe stumbles along the way, but then figures out the solution. And at the back of every book, there are resources that you can apply immediately. There are things you can download and kind of look at it and say, okay, I'm gonna try to apply this. So, but he's one of them. Stan McChrystal, former general, was another one. Jocko Willink, former Navy SEAL, I love his. Tim Ferriss, Marshall Goldsmith. I can go on and on and on. There are a lot of authors that I read. And what I would do is I would read the books, and if I liked them, I shared them with my team. I'd buy them for the team. And also, I'd also get a copy to my boss. And there are times when my team would discuss the books and see what we got out of it, see if we could implement. One of the things we implemented was a thing called Death by Meeting, which is probably my favorite Lencioni book, because it really goes into how stupid most meetings are in business. Because we go to meetings all the time, right, in business. You look at your calendar, it's meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting. First step, obviously, is to take a look and see, do I really need to go to all these meetings? Because you have nothing to contribute to those meetings, don't go. If you're just there to be a listening head, and unless you've been ordered by your boss to go, don't go. But barring that, most meetings are a mishmash of, let's talk about what all of you did from the last meeting, right? So it's an update. And then there's some operational issues. And there may be some strategy. And, and then everybody goes around the table and kind of says what you're working on right now. Okay, so that's okay, but there's not real structure, right? So what Lencioni talked about in a nutshell was break up into 2 meetings. You have a weekly tactical meeting where you sync up as a team and say, okay, what is everybody doing this week? And where are areas where we can help each other? And so number one, that keeps the silo factor to a minimum, because nobody can claim they don't know what somebody else is doing, right? Plus, I tell about what I'm going to do that week, what meetings I'm going to, what engagements I have, blah, blah, blah. So we would do that 9 o'clock in the morning on Monday mornings, either virtually or in person. And that set the tone for the week, so that it's a force multiplier too, because if one direct report said, I'm going to meet with so-and-so at business continuity, on another person, oh, I was going to meet with that person on another matter, then they could both talk offline and say, okay, do you want me to carry the water for you, or should we both go and just combine the meeting? So it's that kind of thing, right? Then you would then have a monthly tactical meeting. Could be 2 to 4 hours, where you shelve the real meaty parts of your organization, whether it's headcount requests, or whether it's budget, or whether it's a major strategy thing that your team is working on. That's when you go through all of that. And so you have time for both. But my point is that we wouldn't have gotten there if I hadn't read that book. And we use that methodology throughout our organization. So find the leadership authors that you like, follow them, and then read the books and share them with your team. Get the best practices and implement what you think you need to implement from those books. Biographies are great too, because not only do they tell a story of a particular person, like Winston Churchill or Abe Lincoln or whoever you want to read about, but there's a common theme in that no matter how high these leaders got in terms of their achievements, whether business or political, they all have doubt. They all had areas of self-doubt and their insecurities. And that's okay, because I think it's important as leaders to make sure that, you need to be tough, you need to be strong, you need to be decisive. And when there's an impasse in your team on making the decision, it's your job to make the decision. Got it. But that being said, you are not supposed to be the end all and be all of everything, right? You have feelings, you have insecurities, you have things that, demons that you need to conquer, in order to become a better leader. So the idea of these biographies is to learn from these people as well and understand that you are not alone if you're insecure about a certain aspect of business, or you're afraid of this or that, the other things, because people who have come before you have also faced the same issues. So I think that's important. And I think read. Just continue to read. And nowadays, not only do you have books, but you have blogs and you have podcasts. You have all these kind of things that they didn't have maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago that you can learn from. I listen to podcasts all the time because I want to learn. And it's also entertaining as well. So make sure you're not only feeding yourself as a leader through reading, but you're feeding your team also through reading and sharing those readings. Even take time during a strategy meeting. Take 15 minutes out of that strategy meeting and say, hey, let's talk about death by meeting. What'd you guys get out of it? You think it might work for us, blah, blah, blah. I think that'd be great, because that's part of continuous improvement. I think the last thing I want to talk about when it comes to continuous improvement is in the area of what I call taking trips. And what I mean by that is taking trips to the field. There is still a term, but it was more popular a few years ago, called MBWA management by walking around. The theory being, get out of your office, walk around, talk to your team, see what they're doing, because you can get very insular in just staying in your office and just having meetings with your team members when it's scheduled, right? And so the idea of management by walking around is really just to touch base with your team. And I know leaders, you get busy, right? You're busy with strategy, you're busy with budget, you got HR issues, you got meetings to attend yourself. But when you can carve out time, go walk around, just say hi to your troops. I was at the headquarters building at Microsoft, and I had some direct reports there, and it was easy to walk around and say hi to them. But I also there was a separate building where the bulk of my organization was, Building 120. And so I would have to get out there on occasion to make sure I just walked around the cubicles and said hi to people, right? And just to let people know that you're appreciative of the work that they do, and that they get a chance to just tell you kind of what they're up to, and or just how they're feeling or whatever. I think it's important. People I've admired in my life, like General Colin Powell, may he rest in peace. When he was, for instance, Secretary of State, pretty big position, right? In the president's cabinet, he would walk around on his own and just pop into some office, junior diplomat's office or what have you, and just say hi. How do you think that made them feel, that Secretary of State Colin Powell would just stop by and say hi for a few minutes and then, and obviously move on, but took the time. It makes an impression. It makes an impression. Now, beyond that, especially if you have a global team, but even if you have a team that's scattered throughout the U.S., you as a leader have to travel and see these folks. And that would be management by flying around. So MBFA, I just kind of coined that term. I put it in the new book. There are too many so-called leaders nowadays that are content to stay at headquarters and never travel to the field to see their teams. They're content to let the teams come to headquarters, right? You come to the palace, you see royalty, then I will grace you with my presence and my wisdom, right? That's okay sometimes, but majority of the time, you should get off your butts and get out and see your teams in the field. Why? Number one, they want to see you. They're gratified that the boss and the leadership team took the time, sometimes a long time, if you're talking about Asia, for instance, or Middle East and Africa, to fly out long distances from the United States to see them. It's important. It shows that you consider their work important. You also need to touch base with them on their turf. Find out what's going right, what's going well, what are the things we at headquarters could be doing better for you, right? So we want some feedback from our team. Well, and just as important is we want feedback from our main stakeholders. And I go a lot of this into the book, in my new book. But in our particular case, as an example, global security, our main stakeholders were, let's say we were going to Turkey, and that's where our Europe, Middle East, and Africa hub was located, and I had obviously we call it EMEA, our EMEA team was there to cover all that territory. Well, of course, we're meeting with our teams, but we need to meet with the president of EMEA, the main general managers, main business unit leaders in that particular subsidiary. We need to meet with our counterparts in HR, our counterparts in legal, our counterparts in real estate and facilities and finance, because we were in the finance org. The idea is to obviously press the flesh and make sure that you let them know we're here to get feedback from you. How are we doing as a security organization? How are my team? Is my team executing on what you want, Mr. or Ms. or Mrs. Business Leader, right? We want that feedback. Yeah, you guys are doing great, but you could be doing better on this. Great, you jot that down as an area for improvement. And the idea is also to show that we consider them a valued partner. We took the time to set up meetings with them so that we could discuss our operations, discuss their business strategies and how we can help with that. Again, being a business enabler, especially if you're a cost center versus a profit center, showing how you can help those cost centers develop product and sell product and make money for the company. And also being willing to take, constructive criticism from these stakeholders and partners as to what are the things we could be doing better. It's important. In our particular case, we also not only met with our own team and our stakeholders at Microsoft, but we would meet with the security folks at the U.S. Embassy to figure out if there are any threats, ongoing threats that we need to be aware of from a U.S. government perspective in these foreign countries. And sometimes we would meet with local police, military intelligence that we have partnerships with, that our teams in the field have partnerships with. Again, it's all part and parcel of you and your team getting out there in the field and getting the ground truth. You can't get the ground truth from headquarters. And again, there are too many, I call them so-called leaders, that won't get off their butts and get out to the field. And yet they think they understand the pulse of the field. They think that headquarters knows best. Colin Powell had a phrase that I mentioned a lot, and I mentioned a lot in the book, was that the field is right until proven wrong. Because even he knew, as a military officer, at one point chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, that while he had broad knowledge of overarching national security strategy, he didn't know what that lieutenant or that sergeant on the ground in Afghanistan or Iraq or Africa or what have you, he doesn't know what they know. They have the ground truth because they're the ones getting shot at, right? And so the field is right until proven wrong. Well, you can't practice that if you're at headquarters 99.9% of the time. So part of continuous improvement is to get out into the field and talk to your teams, talk to your major stakeholders and partners, get feedback. Then you come back to headquarters and you have an after trip report meeting, and then you can dissect, hey, what went right, what went wrong, and these are the areas that we can improve in. And so those are really the main areas of continuous improvement. There are many more things, but I think the idea of having the proper training, leadership training, and continuing that with your team throughout the duration of your time as a leader is important. Reading, important to read leadership books, important to read biographies, important to share those things with your teams and even with the people that you report to, and blogs and podcasts, etc. It's important because it feeds the mind, it feeds the soul, and more importantly, it gives you ideas. It gives you great ideas on things that you can implement. I can't tell you the number of ideas that came to me from reading books that we were able to implement in global security. The other part of it, which I didn't mention, was it also reinforced at times the path that I and our leadership team were taking. As you read these biographies or read these leadership books, and you saw people taking the same path that you're taking or taking the same risks that you're taking, and they were successful, it helps bolster you and it helps give you some added comfort and support in those times when you start to doubt yourself, whether or not the path that you've taken for your team is the right one. And you will have those. They will come. That's a natural part of being a human being. But that's okay. You embrace that and you reinforce the path that you're on. Conversely, reading books like that and